Joining me now, the two top members of the House Intelligence Committee, Republican Chairman Mike Rogers of Michigan and the ranking Democrat Congressman Dutch Ruppersberger of Maryland. Thank you both for being here. Big question of the week, of course, is did the president go too far when he said the words 1967 borders with land swaps? He also included that. But did he unnecessarily stir up Israeli anxiety?
Well, I think so. Those are really delicate subjects that should be on the table for negotiation behind closed doors. But now he's drawn a line in the sand. And if you're Abbas, do you come down from those 67 borders? And if you're Netanyahu, how do you come from the 67 borders, knowing that you have to do that for defense? I think it's a bad strategy to try to negotiate in public. He's
going to get a bit of a do-over here if he wants it at AIPAC. But did you think it was like a bold move to sort of state it as clearly as he did, even if it wasn't all that different from past presidents, or was it a diplomatic mistake?
I think only time will tell. I think clearly the president has to state, number one, that Israel is our ally and we will always support them. That Israel has to have security. They have to have the ability to defend themselves. Now, I assume that he made this move to get the peace talks moving again, but only time will tell. So we all need to see what the president says in the AIPAC speech today so that he'll clarify those issues. But there's no question it has caused great concern on my constituents in the Jewish community.
And you know, the problem is, I think, that the other half of the people I talked to said, this is like pie in the sky. They're nowhere near talking to one another, much less, okay, where do we start? And part of the problem is that now Fatah and Hamas have joined forces, if you will, or they've come to an agreement, and Hamas doesn't recognize Israel's right to exist, and the U.S. considers Hamas a terrorist group. So aren't we just kind of talking about something that we are nowhere near? Can the U.S. ever say, fine, Hamas is now part of the equation?
They would have to have fundamental changes, and I don't see it anywhere on the horizon. And again, that was the problem about establishing those borders. And much of those borders are in place because of security concerns for Israel. And so now you have somebody who doesn't want you to exist, who now believes the standard is the 67 borders. I don't even have to negotiate down from there. I just get to negotiate up from there. That's why I thought this was such a colossal mistake for negotiations. And I just wish the president hadn't done it in public. All of those discussions can happen behind closed doors. Negotiations are about. But when you lay it on the table like that, you dig people into saying, that's my, I will get no worse than that position. Well, it's unacceptable for Israel. And, of course, if you're Hamas, the fact that Israel exists is unacceptable as well. Dangerous.
So really, we're just, it seems to me that we are extraordinary. It seems to me Middle East peace talks are stalled always is a headline somewhere in any decade I've ever covered politics, which has been a while. And it seems to me now they're more than stalled. They're non-existent and further apart. And we also seem to have what seems to me a not great relationship between the Prime Minister of Israel and the President of the United States. What's your take?
First thing, the issue of Hamas is clear. How can you have a negotiated agreement with Hamas or any country who would not acknowledge the existence of Israel? That has to be done. On the other hand, there is a situation where the talks have stalled. And I assume only time will tell that this is what the president was doing to make this an issue. But in the end, Israel is not going to agree with any peace agreement, if they cannot defend their borders. They have the right to defend themselves and to make sure that those countries that they have an agreement with. And you cannot deal with terrorists, and that is Hamas. So that has to be dealt with, or there will not be an agreement.
I want to talk more general about the Arab Spring, because that was actually the focus of the president's talk. And here's some of the commentary that came out talking about the president and the U.S., new U.S. policy, or the same U.S. policy, however you want to look at it. It came from the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies, writing, most people have realized that what the U.S. does or does not do is no longer important, because people took matters into their own hands and decided their own future. So why should people care what President Obama says? America is no longer an issue. Is that the net result of an Arab Spring, where you see the people themselves, which we've applauded, taking over, saying we want our own government, and in fact, not many of them have taken over yet, but nonetheless saying we want our own government? Isn't our influence in one of the most vital areas of the world on the wane?
Well, if you don't make decisive commitments up front, if you don't have a clear policy throughout, this is exactly what's going to happen. And that's one of our concerns with the administrations dealing with the Middle East crisis as they came up. The one standard they applied to Libya, they're not applying to other countries. And that inconsistency does cost us friends and allies in the future. I'm hoping that the President takes the next few weeks to straighten out and make a solid commitment and take out the rises and lows in his Middle East policy so that we all understand what it is. If you ask, I think the average American today, what is our policy in the Middle East? I think we'd be, all of us, including me, would be hard-pressed to say, I understand what it is. I think the President can get through this, but it is going to take a serious step and clear leadership. He doesn't have to say, I'm going to fix this country this way, but we have to have clear plans and operations and commitments as we go forward so we don't have this confusion, so our influence won't wane.
And just quickly before we take a break, since he brought up Libya, have you seen any sign that what we want out of this, which is a cracking of Gaddafi's inner circle, is actually anywhere close to happening?
At this point, no. I think the opposition is not as strong as we thought. NATO has been aggressive in dealing with the no-fly zone, but I think we have a long way to go. And I applauded the President in saying we weren't going to put boots on the ground. We cannot be the sheriff for the rest of the world. We need to support these other countries for democracy and the issues that are important to our best interest. But we cannot be in Afghanistan and leave Iraq and yet be in other areas. We can't do that.
Stick with me a bit. We will continue our conversation shortly. But when we come back, a check of the top stories, and then what to do with billions of dollars in aid the U.S. gives to Pakistan. We are back with the two top members of the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Mike Rogers and Dutch Ruppersberger. Thank you so much. Let us talk about Pakistan. Yeah. So it seems to me there are two choices here for the money we give Pakistan and our relationship with it. There will either be repercussions for incompetence or downright hostile views toward American policy, or it will be business as usual. Which one is it going to be?
Well, there might be a third option there. They are a fair weather friend at best. But remember, they put troops into the tribal areas at our request, and they took thousands of casualties. They have arrested some hundreds of people in the settled areas of Pakistan, Al-Qaeda-related members and Taliban. They provide a logistics hub for our soldiers in Afghanistan. I would be very careful about just pulling the plug. It makes great domestic politics, but I will tell you there are some very real consequences. I argue continue to build on the relationships that we have and continue to work on the Pakistanis, that this should be the one embarrassing moment that maybe you become more transparent and more helpful than you had in the past.
But isn't that business as usual? Like, okay, we don't want to slow down aid. I'm reading you, am I right? Don't slow down aid, certainly don't cut off aid and say, that's the last warning right there.
Well, I'm not saying we shouldn't slow down aid. I think there's probably, we should start holding back a little money and improve our negotiation position in Pakistan, but I don't think we should cut it off. We have a lot of questions we need answered, but I wouldn't just go in with the suggestion that you're an enemy of the United States, we're going to cut you off completely. I think that would be pretty harmful to our long-term national security interests.
And for starters, they take supplies. That's where the supply route is into Afghanistan, so we don't want to do that. But do you agree that there needs to be a slowdown, a pullback of some of that aid and more of a, tit-for-tat approach to this rather than here's some money, could you do this?
First thing, we need to see what is in the best interest of our country, especially while we're in Afghanistan with our men and women in the military. The second issue that we have to deal with, did they hide bin Laden? It's one of two areas. Either they were incompetent, as you mentioned, or secondly, they were complicit. And we have to continue to investigate that issue. But we do need them as long as we're in Afghanistan. Another issue, which is extremely important, is that they have nuclear weapons. And if Pakistan goes very radical, jihad type of government, that could put the whole region at risk and the United States because they have tribal areas where they can train. So I think that we have to be wise in our decision here. But I think it's a time to reset our relationship with Pakistan. They haven't been cooperating in the last couple of months as we would like them to do as it deals with the issue of terrorism. And I think by the fact that they are in a bad way, either they were complicit or they were incompetent. And either one isn't good for them. And this is the time to reset the relationship.
Just to button this up, do you all agree with what we have heard from various administration officials that so far there is nothing they've been able to discover that suggests that Pakistan was complicit in hiding bin Laden's whereabouts. Do you agree with, on the basis of what you've seen?
From the institutional and leadership perspective, the institution of the intelligence, ISI and Army and government. But I believe, and I think Dutch believes, and I think many believe, that there were elements within those organizations that may have provided him safety and at least logistical support to some degree.
And I would agree with Michael on that, but there's one issue that's important to show where the relationship might be going. Right after we brought bin Laden to justice, the Pakistanis had a raid, and they were able to arrest one of the top al-Qaeda leaders in Pakistan. That was about 2 or 3 days after that we bin Laden to justice.
So there's been some intelligence from inside that house that clearly has helped. I wanted to turn to the general terrorist threat. And first of all, just to ask you, there's names that we hear over and over again. One is al-Zawahiri, the supposed number 2, although he's not the interim leader of al-Qaeda. And then al-Awlaki, who we assume is hiding out in Yemen. Of the 2 of those, I'm assuming the U.S. is targeting both. Who do you most want?
Want them both. And you know what? We can do more than one thing at a time. Our intelligence services, 10 years after 9/11, are doing some incredible work. What a committed bunch of folks.
How about who's the most dangerous?
Well, I would think the al-Awlaki from Yemen. And by the way, Mike and I just came back about 3 weeks ago from Yemen. Al-Awlaki was an American-born. He knows our country. He's very smart. He's been recruiting a lot of what we call lone wolves or individuals in the United States to try to do terrorist attacks. He's been using the internet, and he has a magazine that literally trying to get Americans to do attacks. His focus, though, is the United States, and that's why I think he's so dangerous. Bin Laden and the other leaders of al-Qaeda have been tied up in a lot of other areas, Pakistan, Afghanistan. But when it comes to the United States, I think he is the most dangerous, and we have to focus on him with everything that we have. The other thing I want to say, too, is that Bin Laden, that puts us in a great position in the world. You mentioned earlier, what is our reputation? I think people were wondering how strong, how powerful, do we have good intelligence? Well, that was the best I've seen since I've been in the Intelligence Committee, the teamwork approach between the CIA, the NSA, the Special Ops, all coming together. And the message will be sent out now, and it's clear. If you're going to attack Americans and kill us, we're going to find you, and we're going to bring you to justice.
And let me ask you 2 quick questions in our final minute. The first is, from what you know, both publicly and privately, about the strength of the Taliban, the strength of al-Qaeda, and the ready Karzai government, will the U.S. be ready in July for a beginning of a withdrawal that is substantial?
Well, and I think the details on the ground combat conditions should dictate that. No artificial timeline should be put out there. It can be used as a rally call for the enemy. We see that they're trying to take advantage of this. They've had an increase in attacks. I would argue this is that we have to break the back of this spring offensive of the Taliban if Afghanistan is going to be able to defend themselves and we get to come home. Don't put an artificial timeline on it. It might be June, it might be May, it could be July. We shouldn't, I think it's very dangerous to tell the enemy, this is the day you have to hold on to, and then we're going to leave.
And let me turn you to one and have you give you the final word, because I want to ask you about Iraq. Right. Are you convinced enough about the stability of Iraq and its ability to withstand anything Iran might do to pull out the remaining U.S. forces that are now there, but some 50,000 by the end of the year?
Well, clearly Iran is a serious issue, but we're not going to get into that. As far as your question with respect to Iraq, I think that we're in a position now to make a move. I think what we've done in Iraq and what we hope to do in Afghanistan is build up the security, build up their military, build up their intelligence units. And I think we're just about there. Now, we're going to have our intelligence people, and we're going to have people on the ground there to work with them and win the hearts and minds of the people in Iraq. Help them get jobs, work with them on this oil that they have, so they will have money and cash flow that will help them build infrastructure in that country. So I think we've come a long way there, and I think we're going to be able to do what we need to do. And our intelligence will let us know. We have great intelligence. Let us know if there are hot spots and problems. We'll be there to consult and assist, but not with boots on the ground.
Congressman Ruppersberger from Maryland, my home state now.
Good.
Congressman Rogers from Michigan, my former home state. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Jay. Okay.
Up next, we turn to presidential policy.